Priest saves boy from abandoned house, not knowing whose son he is. Father Michael Sullivan was walking hurriedly through the streets of Riverdale as the storm grew stronger. The summer downpour had started suddenly, turning the blue sky into dark clouds that poured rain violently over the small town in rural Pennsylvania. That's when a noise from an abandoned house on Maple Street caught his attention. Father Michael hesitated for a moment, but something urged him to investigate. Pushing aside loose boards at the entrance, he found a boy curled up in the corner, shivering from the cold. His frightened eyes avoided contact and his clothes were dirty and torn. The priest reached out toward the boy. "I won't hurt you." "It's okay," the priest said calmly. The boy remained still, hugging his knees. "You can't stay here, this house is about to collapse. Come with me to the parish, at least until the rain stops," Father Michael insisted. After several minutes of patient conversation, the boy finally agreed to follow him, keeping a safe distance. At the parish, Mrs. Margaret, the 70-year-old housekeeper who had cared for the parish house for decades, widened her eyes when she saw Father Michael entering with the soaking wet boy. "Good heavens! Who is this boy, Father?" she asked, already grabbing towels. "I don't know, Margaret. I found him alone in that abandoned house near the square. He hasn't said anything yet." The boy accepted the towel but remained tense, watching everything with wary eyes. When Mrs. Margaret brought hot soup, he devoured it as if he hadn't eaten in days. "Father, you must notify the police or Child Protective Services. You can't just bring a child here like this," the housekeeper warned in a low voice. "I'll do that first thing tomorrow. It's already too late today, and look how hard it's still raining." After eating, the boy seemed to relax slightly, though he still didn't speak. Father Michael showed him where he could sleep, a small room occasionally used by visiting seminarians. When the priest tried to approach to check if the boy had any injuries, he noticed something peculiar, a small crescent-shaped scar on the boy's right wrist. For a moment, Father Michael felt a strange familiarity, but pushed the thought away. "What's your name?" he tried again. The boy simply turned his face away. That night, Father Michael slept poorly. Confused dreams about his past before. The seminary haunted him, something that hadn't happened in a long time. The next morning, the priest was startled by the sound of breaking glass. He rushed to the small chapel attached to the parish house and found the boy staring fearfully at a silver chalice that had fallen to the ground. "It's nothing," the priest said, trying to calm the boy, who seemed ready to bolt. "This can be fixed." As he cleaned up the broken glass, Father Michael tried again. "We need to know who you are. Do you have family?" "Someone looking." "For you?" The boy looked at the ground and shook his head slightly. The priest couldn't tell if it was a denial or just a gesture of confusion. Later that day, following Mrs. Margaret's advice, Father Michael went to the police station to report the incident. Sheriff Robert, a middle-aged man who had known the priest for years, listened carefully but frowned when he noticed hesitation in the description of where exactly the boy had been found. "Father, are you sure you're telling me everything? The exact location could help us understand the case." Father Michael sighed. "The truth is, I'm afraid the boy will end up back in that place. You know that abandoned house, Robert. It's no place for a child. I understand your concern, but withholding information could hinder the investigation. We need to find out if there's someone responsible looking for him." The sheriff made a few calls, and an hour later, a social worker named Emily arrived at the station. She had worked on dozens of similar cases and seemed genuinely concerned. "I'll contact Child Protective Services and check if there are any records of missing children matching his description. For now, he can stay at the parish under your care, Father, but we'll need to find a proper shelter soon." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Upon returning to the parish, Father Michael found the boy sitting in the backyard garden, gazing at the flowers. For the first time, the child seemed at peace. The priest sat at a respectful distance and stayed silent for a few minutes. "Can I call you by a name until we find out yours?" he asked gently. The boy glanced at him before turning his attention to a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. "How about Matthew?" suggested the priest, thinking of the archangel. To his, Surprised, the boy gave a slight nod. It was the first clear response he'd received from him. In the days that followed, Matthew began adjusting to life at the parish. He still didn't speak, but he started following Father Michael with his eyes, watching his every move closely. Mrs. Margaret, initially hesitant, grew fond of the boy, especially when he spontaneously helped her carry a basket of freshly washed laundry. "He's a good boy, just scared," she remarked to the priest during dinner, while Matthew ate quietly. The case began to stir curiosity in the small town. Some parishioners discreetly asked questions after Mass, while others showed up at the rectory with clothes or toys for the boy. Matthew accepted the gifts with shy glances but remained silent. A week after the encounter at the abandoned house, Emily, the social worker, returned with unsettling news. "We found no records of a missing child matching his description in the entire state. It's as if he doesn't officially exist." "Is that possible?" asked the priest, concerned. "Unfortunately, yes. Some children are never registered, born and living outside the system. But there's something else troubling me, Father." Emily explained she'd noticed the omission in the exact location where the boy was found. "I understand you wanted to protect him, but we need full transparency. I'm trying to help, but you must cooperate completely." Father Michael agreed, embarrassed. He provided all the details and even offered to take Emily to the abandoned house. The next day they visited the site with a deputy. The house was in terrible condition. Broken roof tiles let rain pour in freely, and the floor was covered in leaves and debris. In the corner where the priest had found Matthew, there were signs someone had been living there. An old blanket, food wrappers, and, to everyone's surprise, pencil drawings on the wall. "Look at this," Emily called, pointing to the sketches. They were simple, clearly drawn by a child, but surprisingly expressive. One showed a figure that appeared to be a woman lying down, with a smaller one beside her. "I think he had, or has, someone close who was sick," Emily speculated. The deputy photographed everything and searched the area for clues about the boy's identity, but found no documents or revealing items. Back at the parish, Emily spoke with Matthew, trying to establish communication. She had experience with traumatized children and used various techniques, showing picture cards, offering paper and pencils to draw, and attempting simple games. To everyone's surprise, Matthew accepted the drawing materials and began to sketch. The first drawing clearly showed the abandoned house. The second, more disturbing one, depicted a woman in what appeared to be a hospital bed. The third drawing made Father Michael freeze. It was a male figure wearing what looked like a clerical collar, very similar to his own. "He drew you, Father," remarked Mrs. Margaret, adjusting her glasses for a better look. Emily watched the priest's reaction closely. "Did you know this boy before finding him in the house?" "No, I'd never seen him before," replied the priest, genuinely confused. That night, after a meeting with the parish youth group, Father Michael found Matthew sitting on the stairs leading to his room. The boy was holding something, a small wooden box the priest kept on his shelf containing a few personal mementos. "Matthew, that's private," said the priest, more sternly than he intended. To his surprise, the boy didn't flinch. Instead, he held out the box toward him and for the first time spoke. "Do you remember her?" The voice was quiet and slightly hoarse from disuse, but the words were perfectly clear. Inside the box was an old photograph, Father Michael, much younger without his clerical attire, standing beside a beautiful woman with long, dark hair. How do you know Sarah?" asked the priest, feeling his legs weaken. Matthew didn't answer. Instead, he rolled up his sleeve and showed the crescent-shaped scar on his wrist. With his other hand, he pointed to the priest's arm. Trembling, Father Michael pulled up his own sleeve, revealing an identical scar. He had gotten that mark at 10 years old when he fell from a tree while playing with Sarah, his childhood friend who later became his girlfriend, before he chose his religious vocation. "Who are you?" asked the priest, his voice barely audible. "Mom said I needed to find you before she—" Matthew trailed off, unable to finish, his eyes filled with tears. Just then, Mrs. Margaret appeared in the hallway, drawn by the voices. "What's going on here?" she asked, sensing the tension. Father Michael, still in shock, couldn't respond. Seizing the distraction, Matthew grabbed the photo and bolted, rushing down the stairs. By the time the priest and Mrs. Margaret realized what had happened, the boy had already vanished into the night. "My God, he ran off!" exclaimed Mrs. Margaret, hurrying to the front door. The priest followed her but knew where to look. Heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the abandoned house as a light rain began to fall again. When he arrived, he found Matthew in the exact same corner where he had first discovered him. The boy clutched the photo to his chest, crying silently. "Matthew," the priest called softly, stepping closer, "we need to talk." The boy looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom said you didn't know about me. She said she didn't want to disrupt your life." "Your mother is—" "Sarah?" asked Father Michael, feeling the world spin around him. Matthew nodded. "She's in the hospital. She's really sick. She told me to find you because—" He hesitated. "Because you're my father." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the damaged roof and distant thunder. Father Michael felt his legs give way and leaned against the damp wall. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind in seconds. Memories of Sarah, their youthful plans, the moment. He chose his religious calling, years of dedication to the priesthood, and now, a son. His son. "It can't be," he murmured, more to himself than to Matthew. "We never—" He stopped, realizing this wasn't a conversation to have with the boy. Matthew watched him intently, his eyes revealing a mix of hope and fear. "Mum said you'd say that. She told me to show you this." The boy pulled a small plastic envelope from his pocket, protected from moisture. Inside was a yellowed letter and a photograph. The photo showed Sarah, visibly pregnant, smiling at the camera, in front of a modest house. The date on the back, March 14th, 2000, about 9 months after Father Michael had entered the seminary. With trembling hands, he opened the letter. Sarah's delicate, familiar handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, it means Matthew has found you, as I always knew he would one day. There's so much I wish I could explain, so many decisions I made alone that affected us all. I didn't reach out when I found out I was pregnant because your calling was clear and genuine. Who was I to stand between you and God? I raised our son with love and dignity. I spoke of you every day, told him of your kindness, your faith, your integrity. He grew up knowing his father wasn't absent by choice, but because he didn't know he existed. Now that I'm sick, and the future is uncertain, I must think of his well-being. I'm not asking you to abandon your vows or your path, only that you meet your son, that you help him find his own way when I can no longer be by his side. With eternal love, Sarah." Father Michael folded the letter slowly, struggling to contain the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He looked at Matthew, his son, and saw traces of Sarah in his eyes, in the shape of his chin, but he also recognized himself in the boy's posture, in the slight tilt of his head as he waited for a response. "Mum said you didn't have to accept me," Matthew said, his voice small but brave. "She said she just needed you to know." The priest knelt in front of the boy, meeting him at eye level. "Matthew, Words failed him. How could he explain the storm of emotions raging inside? How could he reconcile his identity as a priest with this newfound revelation of fatherhood? "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't. If I had—" He didn't finish the sentence, unsure what he would have done. Would he have left the seminary? Would he have tried to be both a father and a priest? There were no easy answers. "Are you mad?" Matthew asked, his voice betraying fear of rejection. "Mad? No, son. I'm not mad. He searched for the right word. "I'm scared and sad that I wasn't there for you until now, but mostly, I'm grateful you found me." The word son had slipped out naturally, and they both noticed. A small smile appeared on Matthew's face, lighting up his eyes for the first time since they'd met. "Mum's going to be happy," he said simply. "She always wanted us to meet, even if we couldn't be a normal family." Family. The word echoed in the priest's mind with new meanings, new possibilities, new challenges. "Where is your mother now, Matthew? Which hospital?" "At Mercy General Hospital in Philadelphia." It took me 3 days to get here. Hitchhiked, walked. The exhaustion the boy had kept at bay through sheer determination finally began to show on his face. We need to get you some rest, and first thing tomorrow we'll go see your mother, I promise. Matthew nodded, visibly relieved not to carry the weight of this responsibility alone anymore. When Father Michael reached out to help him up, the boy hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. That simple yet meaningful contact sealed a silent pact between father and son who had just found each other. The words struck Father Michael like lightning. Memories flooded his mind. His farewell to Sarah 15 years ago, when he decided to enter the seminary. The months of anguish as he struggled between his religious calling and his love for her. The last letter he received from her, wishing him happiness on his new path. He never saw her again after that. He never knew she was pregnant. He never knew he had a son. Matthew continued, "She always told me about you. Said you were a good man who helped people. When she got really sick, she gave me instructions to come to this town and find you at the church. But I got scared and hid here." Father Michael Sullivan knelt before the boy, tears streaming down his face. "Matthew, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He opened his arms, and for the first time, Matthew allowed the contact sinking into a tight embrace. Both cried as the rain grew heavier outside. Back at the parish, they found Mrs. Margaret and Emily, who had been called in an emergency, waiting, anxiously. The priest asked to speak with the social worker privately and told her the whole truth. Emily listened carefully, her professional face revealing no judgment. "This changes everything, Father. We'll need to verify this information. Locate the boy's mother and confirm his story, and if it's true, we'll have complex issues to resolve." The next morning, the case took an even greater turn when Bishop William arrived at the parish after receiving an anonymous call about the situation. Tall and imposing, with his 65 years and greying hair, the bishop was known for his strict adherence to church rules. "Father Michael, we need to speak privately," he said in a grave voice after the morning mass. In the parish office, Bishop William got straight to the point. "I've received disturbing information about you sheltering a boy and rumors of a possible personal connection. I expect you to explain this situation." Father Michael knew he couldn't lie. With a trembling voice, he told the whole story: his relationship with Sarah before the seminary, his unawareness of the pregnancy, Matthew's unexpected reappearance, and the shocking revelation. The bishop listened in silence, his face hardening with each word. "This is extremely serious, Father. If this boy is indeed your son, we have a scandal on our hands, and more troubling. You withheld crucial information when entering the seminary. You didn't mention this serious relationship in your vocational evaluation." "I didn't intentionally withhold it, Your Excellency. I considered it a closed chapter of my life when I followed my calling." Bishop William sighed heavily. "Regardless of your intentions, we must proceed with caution. Until this is resolved, I'll have to temporarily suspend you from your parish duties. Father Joseph from the neighboring parish will take over masses while we sort this out." News of the suspension spread quickly through the small town. Theories and rumors began circulating. Some loyal parishioners defended the priest, while others demanded explanations. Matthew's presence in the parish house only fueled more speculation. Meanwhile, Emily worked tirelessly to locate Sarah. With the information Matthew provided, and the last name Father Michael remembered, she finally found her admitted to a public hospital in Philadelphia, the state capital, about 3 hours away. "She's being treated for advanced cancer," Emily reported after a phone call with the hospital's social worker. "Her condition is stable but serious." She confirmed the story and expressed a desire to see her son, and you, if possible. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Father Michael spent the night in deep reflection and prayer. His 15 years in the priesthood had been dedicated to serving the community, comforting the afflicted and guiding the faithful. Now, he himself needed guidance. The next morning, he shared his decision with Bishop William. "I'm going to Philadelphia to see Sarah. I need to fully understand this situation and take responsibility, whatever it may be." The bishop, despite his stern expression, nodded. "It's the right decision, but remember, your actions now will determine your future in the church." Matthew, upon learning he would see his mother, gave the first genuine smile since his arrival. During the car ride, with Emily accompanying them officially, the boy finally began to open up. "Mom always kept your letters," he said. "She used to read them to me when I was little." "Letters?" asked Father Michael, confused. "But I only wrote to her before entering the seminary." "She wrote to you too, but she never sent them. She said they were letters for the heart, not for the mail." This revelation struck the priest deeply. For 15 years, Sarah had maintained a silent dialogue with him, raising their son alone without ever interfering with his calling. St. Mary's Hospital was an old building in downtown Philadelphia. On the 4th floor, in the long-term care wing, they found Sarah. Despite the paleness and frailty caused by her illness, her dark eyes still shone with the same intensity Father Michael remembered. "Matthew!" she exclaimed, reaching out for her son, who rushed into her arms. When her eyes met Father Michael's, still hesitating at the door, tears streamed down her face. "Michael, you came." He approached slowly, feeling simultaneously like the young man in love from 15 years ago and the priest he had become. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Sarah?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "When I found out I was pregnant, you had already entered the seminary. Your decision was made, your calling was clear. Who was I to steer you away from the path you chose?" She paused, stroking her son's hair. "Besides, look at him. I don't regret a single moment." Emily watched from the doorway, keeping a respectful distance but remaining as the official witness to the reunion. In the hours that followed, Sarah shared how she had raised Matthew alone, working as a nurse in different towns. How she had always spoken to her son about his father, a good man who helped people, without ever expressing resentment. "When the cancer was diagnosed last year, we realized we were completely alone," she explained. "My parents are gone. I have no siblings. I considered every possibility, but in the end I decided Matthew had the right to know his father, even if you could never have a conventional relationship." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the attending physician, Dr. Jennifer, who asked to speak with Sarah privately. Father Michael, Matthew, and Emily waited in the hallway, each lost in their own thoughts. When they returned to the room, Sarah seemed weaker but resolute. "The treatment isn't working as we hoped," she said plainly. "I have a few months left, maybe less." The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew clutched his mother's hand tightly, refusing to believe it. Father Michael felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him. "What will happen to Matthew?" he finally asked. Sarah looked at her son with infinite love. "That's the question that's haunted me for months. I have no family to care for him. I can't ask you to abandon your vows, your life, but he's your son too, Michael." Emily, who had maintained a professional demeanor until then, gently intervened. "There are options we can explore. What matters now is ensuring Matthew has stability during this difficult time." In the following days, while they remained in Philadelphia, Father Michael Sullivan faced the deepest conflict of his life. His faith and commitment to the church had never wavered before. Now he was confronted with a responsibility he had never imagined. A son who needed him, and a woman he had deeply loved facing her final days. On a particularly difficult morning, after a sleepless night, he found a small chapel in the hospital. He knelt in the front pew and for the first time in years, openly wept in prayer. "I don't know what to do, Lord. Show me the way." A gentle hand touched his shoulder. It was an elderly nun, Sister Grace, who served as the hospital chaplain. "Sometimes, my child, there isn't just one right path," she said softly. "Sometimes God gives us challenges that seem impossible to show us new possibilities we would never have considered." Those words stayed with him as he returned to Sarah's room. There, he found Matthew reading to his mother, his small but determined voice filling the room with stories of adventures they had never had. Back in Riverdale, Bishop William awaited a resolution. The community was divided, with passionate opinions on all sides. Some argued that the priest should leave the priesthood to care for his son. Others insisted he should keep his vows and find another solution for Matthew. A week later, Sarah took a sudden turn for the worse. Father Michael and Matthew were urgently called back to the hospital. During the trip, the boy remained silent, clutching a small cross the priest had given him. At the hospital, Sarah was conscious but clearly weaker. When they were alone for a moment, she urgently grasped Michael's hand. "I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. I respected your choice because it was the right thing to do. I raised our son telling him stories about the wonderful man you are, even knowing you might never meet." "I never stopped loving you either, Sarah," the priest confessed. "I turned that love into dedication to others, into service to God, but a part of me always belonged to you." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Then I made the right choice." She paused, gathering strength. "Now I need you to promise me something. Don't abandon your vocation for us. Matthew needs a father, but he also needs the man you've become, a man of faith, of principles, who helps others. How can I do that? The church is made of people, Michael. And people can understand, they can adapt. Find a middle ground, that's all I ask." That night, Sarah showed surprising improvement. The doctors spoke of a reaction to the new medication, or even sheer willpower. But Father Michael saw something deeper at work. Seizing this moment of clarity and renewed strength, the priest made a decision. He called Bishop William and requested an urgent meeting. The bishop, sensing the gravity of the situation, agreed to come to Philadelphia. 2 days later, in a small hospital meeting room, an unusual gathering took place. Father Michael, Bishop William, Sarah in a wheelchair, Matthew, Emily, and Dr. Jennifer. Bishop William, initially stern and formal, listened with growing attentiveness as each person shared their perspective. Sarah spoke with dignity about her decision to raise Matthew alone and her hope that father and son could have some kind of relationship. The doctor explained Sarah's condition with compassionate honesty. Matthew, despite his young age, expressed with surprising clarity his desire to know the father he had always imagined. Finally, Father Michael spoke, his voice steady despite his emotion. "Your Excellency, I know I stand at a crossroads that seems to have no solution within conventional rules. But I also know that my calling to the priesthood is genuine, just as my responsibility toward my son is genuine." Bishop William studied Father Michael for a long moment, then looked at Matthew, who met his gaze without fear. "The Church has rules for good reasons, Father Michael," he began slowly. "But it also has compassion and wisdom to understand extraordinary situations." He paused meaningfully. "I'm willing to seek a solution that allows you to keep your vows while also fulfilling your responsibilities as a father. It won't be easy, and it will require sacrifices from everyone involved." And so began what the people of Riverdale would later call the arrangement. Bishop William, after consulting higher ecclesiastical authorities and carefully presenting the case, secured a special permission. Father Michael would be transferred to a rural parish on the outskirts of town, where he could carry out his ministry while discreetly caring for Matthew. The women of the health ministry, led by Mrs. Dorothy, a respected 67-year-old widow, volunteered to help look after Matthew when the priest was occupied with his duties. More importantly, they committed to visiting Emily regularly and assisting with her treatment. Surprisingly, news of Father Michael's transfer sparked a spontaneous outpouring of support. Many families in Riverdale rallied behind the arrangement, seeing it not as a scandal, but as an example of responsibility and love. Of course, there were also critics. Some more conservative parishioners distanced themselves, unable to accept the situation. Father Michael himself faced disapproving glances from fellow priests during diocesan meetings. Emily was transferred to Riverdale's small hospital, allowing her to be closer to her son and receive frequent visits. To the doctor's surprise, her condition stabilized. There was no cure for her advanced cancer, but she gained precious time with Matthew and Michael. For Matthew, adjusting wasn't easy. Used to a wandering life with his mother, he now had to adapt to the routine of a small rural community, attend the local school, and handle curious questions about his relationship with the priest. "Why do you live with the priest?" other children would ask. "Because he's my father," Matthew would reply simply, with an honesty that disarmed even the most skeptical adults. At school, Miss Clare noticed Matthew's talent for drawing and encouraged him. His illustrations, once dark and melancholic, began to show color and hope: the country church, the animals from the neighboring farm, the serene face of his mother. In the hospital, Emily received palliative care, and on good days she volunteered as a consultant, sharing her experience as a nurse. Her dignity in the face of illness and her lack of bitterness earned the medical staff's respect. Father Michael divided his time between parish duties, visits to Emily, and moments with Matthew. Despite constant exhaustion, he found a new dimension to his vocation. He saw God in his son's eyes, in Emily's courage, in the unexpected solidarity of the community. 6 months passed. One sunny Sunday afternoon after Mass, Mrs. Dorothy urgently sought out the priest. "Father, Emily is asking to see you and Matthew. It's important." At the hospital, they found Emily sitting up in bed, more alert than she had been in weeks. She smiled when she saw them. "I have something for both of you," she said, handing Matthew a carved wooden box. "Open it." Inside were dozens of letters organized by date, letters Emily had written to Michael over the years, recounting Matthew's first steps, his fears, his joys, her reflections on life and love. "Now you can read them together," she said softly. "It's our story." That night, Matthew slept at the hospital beside his mother, while Father Michael Sullivan returned to the parish for the weekly novena. During the celebration, he looked at the familiar faces of his small community and felt deep gratitude. After everyone left, he remained in the empty church, kneeling before the altar. He no longer needed words in his prayers. His heart, once divided, now found harmony in his dual calling: to serve God and to love his son. The next morning, he was awakened by a loud knock at the door. It was Matthew, breathless from running. "Dad, come quick. Mom had an amazing idea and wants to talk to you now." At the hospital, they found Emily as lively as they hadn't seen her in months. "I had an epiphany last night," she explained. "The abandoned house where you found Matthew. What if we turned it into something useful? A place for children who need temporary help like Matthew did." The idea took Father Michael by surprise. "But that house is practically falling apart." "Emily, exactly why. We could rally the community to renovate it. It would be a project that brings people together, gives purpose to the old house, and helps other children too." Emily's enthusiasm was contagious. In the following days, the idea was presented to the community, and to many surprise was met with immediate support. The owner of the abandoned house, an elderly man who had moved away years ago, agreed to donate the property when he learned about the project. The mobilization began almost spontaneously. Masons offered their services for free on weekends. Shopkeepers donated construction materials. The women organized raffles and bazaars to raise additional funds. Even some parishioners who had distanced themselves due to Father Michael's situation returned, drawn by the chance to be part of something bigger than their disagreements. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Matthew was at the center of it all. His talent for drawing was put to use creating posters for the project, and his personal story, now known to everyone, served as inspiration. The once shy and frightened boy began transforming into a confident and sociable child. Emily, even on days when the pain was more intense, actively participated in the planning. Her knowledge as a nurse helped define the necessary requirements for a space suitable for vulnerable children. Bishop William, who had initially hesitated to support the arrangement, became one of the project's biggest advocates. During a visit to Riverdale, he surprised everyone by rolling up his sleeves and helping carry bricks for the construction. "Christ didn't teach us to judge, but to build," he declared when questioned by a reporter from the small local paper. The renovation progressed quickly. In just 2 months, the abandoned house began taking on new life. The roof was completely replaced, walls were reinforced, and electrical and plumbing systems were renewed. The interior was redesigned to include activity rooms, modest but comfortable dormitories, a small library, and a communal kitchen. During this time, Emily's health fluctuated. There were hopeful days when she could even visit the construction. Sight and dark days when only the presence of Matthew and Michael kept her connected to the world. One particularly difficult afternoon, when Emily was drowsy from strong pain medication, Father Michael sat beside her bed and held her hand. "I'm so proud of you, Emily," he whispered. "Your strength, your dignity, you're extraordinary." She opened her eyes slowly. "It's not strength, Michael, it's love. It's always been love." She squeezed his hand gently. "Promise me you'll keep loving Matthew this much, with this same intensity when I'm no longer here." "I promise, and I also promise he'll never forget how wonderful his mother is." A gentle smile lit up Sarah's pale face. "You know what hurts the most? Not being able to see the Hope Shelter finished, not being able to watch Matthew grow up. There are so many things I wanted. One day at a time, Sarah. One miracle at a time." The word miracle hung in the air between them. It wasn't. A word Father Michael Sullivan used lightly, even as a man of faith. But looking at Sarah, at everything she had done and continued to do despite her condition, he couldn't find another word that fit. And perhaps it was that very word that set in motion what happened next. The following morning, Dr. Catherine, the physician overseeing Sarah's case, ordered new tests after noticing unexpected changes in her vitals. The results, available 2 days later, left the medical team stunned. "There's no clear scientific explanation for this," the doctor explained, showing the scans to Sarah and Father Michael. "But the tumor appears to have stopped growing. In fact, there are signs of regression in some areas." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, afraid to let hope flare up only to be cruelly dashed later. "It means we've bought time. I can't promise a cure. That would be irresponsible. But you're responding to treatment in a way we didn't anticipate." This news, shared carefully with Matthew, brought new energy to the entire community involved in the Hope Shelter project. Many saw it as a divine sign, confirmation they were on the right path. The renovation of the house progressed with renewed vigor. What had once been a project born of pain and necessity was becoming more and more a symbol of hope and renewal. The opening date was set for the end of that month, coinciding with the town's patron saint festival. The week before the opening, Father Michael received an unexpected visit at the rural parish, Sheriff Robert and social worker Emily. "Father, we're here officially but also as friends," Robert began. "Matthew's case has drawn attention from higher authorities. The situation is unusual," Emily added. "Normally, a child in Matthew's situation would be placed in the institutional foster system while his legal status was resolved. But given the circumstances—" "Given the circumstances," Robert interrupted, "and the fact that you're undeniably his biological father, we've secured special permission. Matthew can officially remain in your custody, with oversight from Child Protective Services." "Of course." Father Michael felt immense relief. The fear of losing Matthew to the system had been a constant dread he'd barely allowed himself to acknowledge. "And what about the church?" Emily asked. "Is this situation compatible with your vows?" "Bishop William has been extraordinarily understanding," the priest replied. "He recognizes this as an exceptional situation requiring an exceptional response. As long as I uphold my vows and fulfill my priestly duties, I can embrace my fatherhood." On the day of the Light and Hope Shelter's opening, the entire town of Riverdale seemed to be there. The small building, once abandoned and eerie, now glowed with its freshly painted soft yellow walls and simple yet well-tended gardens. Sarah, though still weak, was present in a wheelchair, her eyes shining with joy. Matthew stood proudly beside her in his new shirt, ready to help cut the ribbon. Bishop William presided over the ceremony, emphasizing how the project had been born from adversity, but flourished through cooperation and community love. Father Michael, moved, thanked everyone who had contributed. "This shelter represents more than just walls and a roof," he said. "It represents the possibility of turning pain into purpose, loneliness into community, abandonment into belonging." When the time came to cut the ribbon, Bishop William surprised everyone by calling forward not just Matthew and Sarah as planned, but all the children present at the ceremony. "This place is for you," the bishop said, handing the scissors to Matthew, so no child has to face the world alone. The scissors sliced through the red ribbon, and applause erupted from the crowd. Sarah, holding her son's hand, wept silently. Father Michael, standing beside them, felt something extraordinary had been born from what was once such a complicated and painful situation. In the following months, the Hope Shelter began its work, initially welcoming children for daytime activities while overnight permissions were finalized. Matthew, despite his young age, became an unofficial host of sorts, especially attentive to the more frightened newcomers. Sarah's health continued to surprise the doctors. The partial remission of her cancer didn't mean a cure, but it gave her enough strength to actively participate in the shelter, using her experience as a nurse to care for the children and guide volunteers. Father Michael divided his time between parish duties and his new role as the shelter's spiritual director. His fatherhood, once a scandal to some, had become an accepted part of his public identity. The children called him Father Dad, a Pao, title he accepted with humility and growing confidence. On a particularly meaningful Sunday, 1 year after the encounter in the abandoned house, Father Michael prepared a special sermon. The small rural church was full. Many had come specifically to hear him on this symbolic date. Matthew and Sarah sat in the front pew beside Mrs. Dorothy and other women from the health ministry. Bishop William, in a show of continued support, was also present. Father Michael stepped up to the pulpit and looked at the familiar faces before beginning. "A year ago, a storm led me to an abandoned house where I found a frightened boy. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change not just my life, but the life of this entire community." He paused, his eyes meeting Matthew's. "Many have asked how I reconcile my priesthood with my newfound fatherhood. The answer is simple yet profoundly complex. With love. The same love that led me to the altar now allows me to be a father to my son." Turning to Sarah, he continued, "Others have questioned whether I keep my vows of chastity while publicly acknowledging a child. Again, the answer lies in love. The love that existed between me and my son's mother belongs to the past before my vows, but the fruit of that love lives in the present and deserves to be honored." Addressing the entire congregation, his voice grew stronger. "Some may say I'm less of a priest for being a father. I say I'm more complete in my ministry because I now understand in my very bones what it means to love unconditionally, to protect fiercely, to wait patiently." Silent tears streamed down many faces. Bishop William gave a slight nod of quiet approval. "This community has taught me the true meaning of the word family, not just the one formed by blood, but the greater family that sustains us when life becomes too hard to face alone." Father Michael stepped down from the pulpit and walked to stand beside Matthew and Sarah. "This boy has taught me more about faith than all my years in seminary. This woman has shown me what dignity in suffering truly means. And all of you," he gestured to the congregation, "have shown me what the church should truly be, not a place of judgment, but a refuge of compassion and acceptance." At the end of the Mass, a long line formed to greet the unlikely little family. Elderly parishioners who had initially been scandalized by the situation now shook the priest's hand with renewed respect. Children who attended the Hope Shelter surrounded Matthew with joy. Before leaving, Bishop William called Father Michael aside for a private conversation. "When you first told me about this situation, I thought it would mean the end of your priesthood," the bishop confessed. "Now I see it was only the beginning of a new dimension in your ministry. The diocese is considering expanding the Hope Shelter model to other parishes. That would be wonderful, Your Excellency. And there's one more thing," the bishop said, hesitating slightly. "We've received an unusual request from a national Catholic magazine. They want to tell your story, the story of the priest, Father, as an example of how the Church can respond with compassion to complex situations without abandoning its principles." Father Michael thought for a moment. "If this could help others in similar situations, I'm willing, but Sarah and Matthew would have to agree as well." That evening, over a simple dinner at the rectory, Father Michael, Sarah, and Matthew discussed the proposal. Matthew, now more articulate and confident, had clear opinions. "If our story can help other kids find their fathers, I think we should tell it," he said with the straightforward simplicity of a child. Sarah, more cautious, weighed in. "This would expose us nationally. Are you prepared for that, Michael? For the criticism that will surely come alongside the support? The priest looked at the two faces that had become the center of his world. I'm ready to face anything that keeps us together as a family, he replied with conviction. The article was published 3 months later, coinciding with the final approval for the Hope Shelter to operate full-time, including overnight stays for children in emergency situations. The sensitive, balanced piece sparked a national debate about family, religious vocation, and the many forms of love and service. To the surprise of many, including Father Michael himself, most reactions were positive. Letters and emails poured in from across the country, many from single parents who felt comforted seeing the church address their reality with compassion. Of course, there were also harsh criticisms. More conservative groups within the church publicly questioned Bishop William's decision to allow Father Michael to remain in the priesthood. Some demanded his immediate removal, but the bishop stood firm in his support. Amid this media storm, life in Riverdale carried on. The Hope Shelter welcomed its first children for temporary stays. Matthew, now a model student at the local school, divided his time between studies, helping at the shelter, and caring for his mother, whose health, despite temporary stability, remained fragile. Sarah, aware that her time might be limited despite partial remission, dedicated herself to documenting everything. She wrote detailed journals, took photographs, and recorded video messages for Matthew to watch in the future. Her determination to leave a positive legacy inspired everyone around her. One quiet afternoon, as she watched Matthew helping other children with homework at the shelter, Sarah shared a thought with Father Michael. Do you remember the day we said goodbye, when you decided to enter the seminary? How could I forget? He replied, It was the hardest day of my life up to that point. I was 3 weeks pregnant that day, I didn't know yet. She paused, watching her son from a distance. Sometimes I wonder how it would have been if I had found out earlier, if I had told you. I think I know the answer, said the priest. Softly, I would have stayed with you. I would have left the seminary. And would you have been happy? I would have been happy in a different way, but I wouldn't have become the man I am today. And maybe that version of me wouldn't have been the one Matthew needed to find in that abandoned house. Sarah smiled, a quiet wisdom in her eyes. That's why I've never regretted my decision. Our paths needed to part so they could cross. Again like this, everything in its own time. Time, however, was not generous. Despite the partial remission, Sarah's cancer began to advance again a few months later. The treatments became intense once more, often leaving her exhausted. On a particularly difficult Sunday, when Sarah couldn't get out of bed to go to Mass, Matthew stayed by her side all day, reading stories, showing her drawings, simply holding her hand during the worst moments of pain. You're the best part of me, you know, she murmured when the pain eased a little. Everything good in me, I see in you. And when I see you with your father, she smiled, it's like the circle is complete, like everything makes sense. Matthew, mature beyond his years because of the circumstances, replied, I'll take care of Dad when you can't be here anymore. I promise. Sarah hugged him with all the strength she had left. The following week, during a routine medical visit, Dr. Catherine confirmed what everyone had feared. The cancer was spreading rapidly, and treatment options were running out. How long? Sarah asked directly, while Father Michael held her hand. Weeks, maybe a few months, the doctor answered with painful honesty. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Instead of despair, a strange peace seemed to settle over Sarah. That same afternoon, she asked to go to the Hope Shelter, where she gathered the team of volunteers. I don't want sorrow or sad faces, she said firmly. What we've built here is bigger than any of us. It will continue after I'm gone, and I need you all to promise me something. Matthew will need every one of you, not just his father, but this whole community that's become our family. The volunteers, many holding back tears, formed a circle around Sarah and solemnly promised to carry on her legacy and support Matthew and Father Michael. In the weeks that followed, something extraordinary happened in Riverdale. As if sensing time was precious, the community came together to fulfill Sarah's small and big wishes. A visit to the waterfall on the outskirts of town, where she had walked in her youth. an impromptu concert of the regional songs she loved, a collection of letters written by the children at the shelter, thanking her for her dedication. Father Michael watched it all with a heavy heart, but also deep gratitude. The community that had once been divided over their unusual situation, now united to honor the woman he had loved so many years ago, the woman he had, in a way, never stopped loving. One afternoon, while Matthew was at school, Sarah asked to speak to the priest alone. "Michael, I need you to promise me something." Her voice was weak but determined. "When I'm gone, don't let Matthew feel guilty for being happy. Children have that tendency to think they can't smile when they're grieving." "I promise," he replied, swallowing his tears. "And you too. Don't feel guilty for continuing to live, for finding joy in your work, in your ministry and fatherhood." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Be happy, Michael. That's all I've ever wanted for you." The priest nodded, unable to speak. "One last thing," Sarah continued. "In the future, maybe years from now, if you meet someone who could be a mother to Matthew and a companion to you, don't let your vows stop you from considering that possibility." Father Michael Sullivan was surprised by the suggestion. "Sarah, you know that would mean leaving the priesthood." "I know. And I also know you're devoted to your calling, but people change, circumstances change. I just want you to know that if that path ever opens for you, you'll have my blessing." That night, after putting Matthew to bed, Father Michael remained in prayer for a long time. He wasn't asking for a healing miracle. It seemed too late for that. He prayed for strength for what was to come, wisdom to guide his son through the valley of loss, and grace to honor Sarah's legacy. When he finally rose from the kneeler, his legs were numb. He looked at the small crucifix on his wall and whispered, "How do I do this, Lord? How can I be both a priest and a father?" That same night, as he walked down the hall to check if Matthew was sleeping soundly, he heard muffled sobs. He paused at the door, hesitant, still unsure how to handle these moments. Fatherhood was uncharted territory, every gesture a discovery. "Matthew?" he called softly, pushing the door open. The boy quickly wiped his tears, pretending he was fine. "Sorry, I tried not to cry too loud," he said. Father Michael sat on the edge of the bed. "Never apologize for crying, son, especially not for someone you love. The boys at school say men don't cry." "Then the boys at school are very wrong," Father Michael said gently. "You know, Jesus wept when his friend Lazarus died, and he was the Son of God." Matthew seemed to think about that for a moment. "Do you ever cry?" he asked, looking at his father with genuine curiosity. "Yes, more often than you'd think. Because of Mum." Father Michael nodded. "Because of her, because of you, because of so many things I see in the parish. Life is full of moments that touch us deeply." After a brief silence, Matthew asked, "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "Of course." That night, lying beside his son, who had finally fallen into peaceful sleep, Father Michael realized that perhaps the greatest challenge wasn't balancing his vocation with fatherhood, but learning to be vulnerable before Matthew, to show that he didn't have all the answers, that he also felt fear and pain, that he too needed comfort sometimes. The next morning over breakfast, he noticed something had subtly shifted between them. A new closeness, born from that nighttime, conversation, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. "I had an idea," Matthew suddenly said, interrupting his thoughts. "We could take Mom to watch the sunrise on the town hill. She always said it was the most beautiful time of day." Father Michael looked at his son with admiration. Amid his own grief, Matthew was thinking of ways to bring joy to his mother in the time she had left. "That's a wonderful idea. Let's talk to Dr. Catherine to see if it's possible." To everyone's surprise, the doctor not only approved the outing but offered to accompany them, bringing the necessary equipment to ensure Sarah's comfort. Word of the sunrise trip spread quickly, and soon many from the community volunteered to help. Mr. Joseph, a retired carpenter, adapted his pickup truck to fit the wheelchair. Mrs. Teresa prepared a basket of hot tea and homemade cookies. Group of young parishioners offered to arrive early and set up a comfortable spot at the top of the hill. In the early hours of Sunday morning, a small caravan set out for Hillside Cross. Sarah, bundled against the morning chill, had eyes bright with anticipation. Matthew walked beside the wheelchair, holding his mother's hand, and pointing out the constellations still dotting the dark sky. When they reached the top, they found a surprise. More than 20 people from the community were already there, forming a silent semicircle, each holding a small candle. In the center, they had improvised a sort of bed with cushions and blankets, protected by a simple canopy against the morning dew. "What is this?" Sarah asked, moved. "A celebration," replied an elderly woman, stepping forward to embrace her. "Her celebration of light, of life, of you." As the sky began to brighten on the horizon, Father Michael led a brief prayer of gratitude. It wasn't a formal mass, but it carried the same reverence, the same connection to the sacred. Sarah, settled, on the makeshift bed with Matthew nestled beside her, watched the spectacle of the rising sun with silent tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect," she whispered, "simply perfect." As the sun climbed higher, bathing the hillside in golden light, someone began to sing softly. Others joined in, and soon a simple, touching melody filled the morning air. It wasn't a traditional hymn, but a popular American song about hope and renewal. Back at the hospital hours later, Sarah seemed transformed, physically exhausted, but with a renewed inner energy. "Thank you," she said to Father Michael as the nurses helped her back into bed, "for giving me one more memory to take with me." The days that followed were a mix of intense and precious moments. In one of them, Sarah asked to be alone with Mrs. Margaret, the parish housekeeper who had initially resisted Matthew's presence, but had now become one of the strongest advocates for their unconventional little family. No one knew exactly what the two discussed during that hour, but when Father Michael returned with Matthew to the room, he found the two women holding hands, a silent pact sealed between them. "Mrs. Margaret will take care of the practical things when I'm no longer here," Sarah explained simply. "She promised to teach Matthew how to make that cornbread cake you love so much." This was how Sarah faced the nearing end, planning, organizing, making sure nothing was left unresolved, that no one would be left helpless after her departure. A week later, on a morning when Sarah was particularly lucid and pain-free, she asked to speak with some children from the Hope Shelter. 5 were chosen, those whose stories most resembled Matthew's, of abandonment and reunion. Sitting on the hospital bed, frail in appearance but with bright eyes, Sarah told them a simplified version of her story, how she had raised Matthew alone, how he had searched for his father when she fell ill, how the community had come together to support them. "Sometimes we think we're alone in the world," she told the attentive children, "but that's rarely true. There's always someone willing to help, someone looking for us, someone who cares. Family isn't always just a mother, father and children living in the same house. Family is the people who love us, who take care of us, who help us grow." A 9-year-old girl, recently taken in by the shelter after being found living on the streets with her sick mother, raised her hand timidly. "But what happens when the person we love most is gone? How do we stop crying all the time?" Sarah looked at the child with infinite tenderness. "We don't," she answered simply. "We cry when we need to cry. And then, little by little, we learn to turn the sadness into gratitude for the memories we have, for the love we shared." 2 weeks later, on a sunny spring morning, Sarah asked to be taken to the hospital garden. Seated in her wheelchair, with Matthew and Father Michael Sullivan by her side, she watched the birds, the flowers, the intensely blue sky. "It's a good day," she murmured, closing her eyes to feel the sun on her face. "A very good day." 3 days later, Sarah's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospital room became an improvised sanctuary, with members of the community taking turns in silent vigils in the hallway, respecting the family's space, but offering their constant presence. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, when only Matthew, Father Michael, and Mrs. Margaret were in the room, Sarah woke from a long sleep and asked for water. Her voice was weak, but her eyes held a striking clarity. "You're here," she said, looking at each of them. "My family." Matthew, who had barely left his mother's side for more than a few minutes during those days, gently squeezed her hand. "We'll always be here, Mom." "I know," she smiled. "That's why I can go in peace." "Don't talk like that," Matthew pleaded, his voice trembling. You'll get better, you'll see." Sarah looked at her son with infinite love. "My dear, remember what we talked about, how some journeys are shorter than others." Matthew nodded, silent tears streaming down his face. "My journey here is ending," she continued softly, "but our story lives on through you, through the shelter, through all the lives we've touched, together." Father Michael held Sarah's other hand, unable to hold back his own tears. "You've given us so much, Sarah, more than we could ever repay." "No," she corrected, her smile faint but genuine. "I just loved, and was loved in return. There's no greater gift." In the hours that followed, Sarah drifted between deep sleep and moments of surprising clarity. During one of those moments, she asked to be alone with Matthew. "What did you talk about?" Father Michael asked later, when her son stepped out of the room with red-rimmed eyes, but a serene expression. "A secret," Matthew replied, managing a small smile for the first time in days. "She said I'd tell you one day, but only when the time is right." As evening fell, Mrs. Teresa, one of the oldest members of the health ministry, brought a small harp and offered to play. With the medical staff's permission, she sat discreetly in a corner of the room and plucked gentle melodies that seemed to float in the air, creating an almost tangible atmosphere of peace. It was during this ethereal music that Sarah, surrounded by those she loved, passed peacefully. Matthew, holding her hand until the very end, was the first to notice the subtle change in her breathing. Father Michael, on the other side of the bed, led a brief prayer, his voice steady despite his grief. The news of Sarah's passing spread quickly through the small town, touching many who, even without knowing her personally, had been moved by her story. The next morning, dozens of people left flowers at the hospital entrance and the doors of the Hope Shelter. The mayor of Riverdale, Mr. Charles Thompson, who until then had kept his distance from the controversy involving the priest and his newly discovered son, paid a personal visit to the parish house to offer his condolences and announced that the town would cover all funeral expenses. "Sarah Mendez represented the best of our community," he declared formally but with sincere emotion. "Her courage and dignity in the face of adversity, her love for her son, her vision for the Hope Shelter, all of it deserves our deepest respect." The funeral was simple but deeply moving. The entire town attended, many bringing flowers from their own gardens or small meaningful items to leave by the casket, drawings from the shelter's children, thank you notes, photographs. Bishop William presided over the ceremony, assisted by Father Michael, who insisted on participating actively, finding comfort in the familiar rituals. Matthew, dressed in his best outfit and clutching a drawing he had made of his mother, remained composed throughout the service, only letting his tears flow freely as the earth began to cover the coffin. The days that followed were hazy. Father Michael tried to maintain a routine for Matthew's sake. School, regular meals, bedtime prayers, but both felt the void left by Sarah in every corner of the parish house, in every activity at the Hope Shelter. A week after the funeral, the priest found Matthew in his mother's hospital room, which had not yet been cleared out. The boy was sitting on the bed, flipping through a photo album. "She's watching over us from heaven, isn't she?" Matthew asked when his father entered. "Yes, son, I'm sure she is." "Then we have to do things that would make her proud, right?" Father Michael sat beside his son, moved by the simple wisdom in his words. "Absolutely right." And so began what they would later call the Sarah Project, a series of initiatives inspired by her passions and dreams. Matthew suggested starting a medicinal herb garden at the Hope Shelter, remembering how his mother always spoke about the healing power of plants. Father Michael organized a program for regular visits to isolated patients at the hospital, something Sarah had always advocated for in her nursing practice. Mrs. Dorothy and other women in the community formed a support group for single mothers, offering everything from practical childcare help to legal guidance and emotional counseling. Grief inevitably had its dark moments. Matthew sometimes woke up crying in the middle of the night, calling for his mother. Father Michael faced overwhelming doubts, questioning past decisions and present responsibilities. But as Sarah had foreseen, the pain was eased by the presence of the community that had become their extended family. 6 months after Sarah's passing, during the celebration of the Hope Shelter's first anniversary, Bishop William made a surprise announcement. In recognition of the pioneering work done here in Riverdale, the diocese is establishing a special fund to expand the Hope Shelter model to other communities. This fund will be named the Sarah Foundation, in honor of the woman whose vision and courage inspired this project. Matthew, now nearly 11, was the first to applaud, his face lit by a genuine smile that had grown rare in recent months. Father Michael, standing beside him, felt a wave of emotion, pride, gratitude, and a lingering ache of loss. In the months following the announcement of the Sarah Foundation, the priest found himself navigating uncharted waters. The diocese's official recognition brought new responsibilities and challenges. Journalists from Catholic publications across the country sought him out for interviews. Invitations to speak about the Hope Shelter model arrived weekly. The small rural parish that had been his refuge was now becoming a point of reference. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Matthew," he confessed one evening as they washed the dinner dishes. The boy, growing not just in height but in emotional maturity each day, answered with the simple wisdom that often surprised his father. "Mom didn't know if she was ready to raise me alone either. She said we learn by doing." Father Michael smiled, amazed by his son's ability to find the right words. "Your mother was very wise. And so are you, Dad, just in a different way." The relationship between father and son had evolved into a partnership of mutual support. In moments when the priest felt overwhelmed by parish demands and the responsibilities of the shelter, it was often Matthew who reminded him to rest, to take a break and breathe. And in moments when the boy struggled at school or acutely missed his mother, it was the priest who found the right words or simply offered the comforting silence his son needed. Not that the journey was easy. Adolescence was approaching, bringing new challenges. Matthew occasionally tested boundaries, questioned rules, and showed flashes of rebellion. One afternoon, he came home from school with his uniform torn and a black eye. "What happened?" asked the priest, alarmed. Matthew kept his eyes down, reluctant to answer. "Nothing serious, just a stupid argument." Mrs. Margaret, who had become a maternal figure for the boy, insisted on applying a cold compress to the bruise, while whispering something in his ear that made him look at his father with a guilty expression. Later, when they were alone, Matthew finally confessed. "They were saying things about you, about me, about how it's not normal for a priest to have a son." Father Michael felt a tightness in his chest. Despite growing acceptance in the community, there were still those who judged, who whispered in corners, who turned his story into something scandalous. "And you fought them over that." "It wasn't like that at first," Matthew explained, running his hand through his hair in a gesture so much like Sarah's that it hurt. "I tried to ignore it like you always teach me. But then one of them said Mom must have been—" He stopped, unable to repeat the words. "I understand," the priest said softly, anger mixing with compassion. "And then you lost your temper." Matthew nodded, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I know it's not what you and Mom taught me." Father Michael sat beside his son and wrapped an arm around his shoulders, now broader than just a year ago. "You know, son, when I was young, I got into a few fights too," he smiled at the memory. "Especially when someone spoke badly about your grandmother." Matthew looked at his father, surprised. "You? Fighting? Hard to believe, isn't it? But yes, I had quite a temper before I found my path in the church." He paused, searching for the right words. "What I mean is, I understand the urge to defend the people we love, but we have to find better ways to do it." The next day, Father Michael visited Matthew's school and requested a meeting with the principal and the parents of the boys involved in the fight. Instead of seeking punishment, he proposed something different, that the boys complete volunteer hours at the Hope Shelter, seeing firsthand the work done there. "Prejudice comes from ignorance," he explained calmly. "Maybe seeing our reality will open their eyes." Principal Susan, a middle-aged woman with decades of teaching experience, looked at the priest with renewed respect. "You know, Father Michael, when all this began, I had my doubts about how it would affect Matthew at school. Now I see that having a father like you is one of the greatest blessings he could have." Though painful, the incident ended up strengthening the bond between father and son, as well as between their unconventional family and the wider community. The boys who had taunted Matthew surprisingly became regular volunteers at the shelter. One of them, Tyler, eventually became a close friend of Matthew's. "How did you manage to forgive him so easily?" Father Michael once asked, watching the two boys chatting animatedly while painting a wall at the shelter. Matthew thought for a moment before answering, "Remember that story Mom used to tell me? About the boy who had a bag full of nails, and his father told him to hammer one into the fence every time he got angry. And later, when he learned to control his anger, his father told him to pull the nails out, but the holes remained." "I vaguely remember," said the priest, intrigued by the direction of the conversation. "Mom told me that forgiving is like running your hand over the holes and accepting they're part of the fence now. We can't erase them, but we can choose not to stare only at them." Father Michael hugged his son, once again amazed at the wisdom Sarah had managed to impart in such a short time. Life went on, with its ups and downs. Matthew was excelling in school, showing a special talent for art and natural sciences. His drawings, growing more sophisticated, began gaining recognition beyond the borders of Riverdale. One of his illustrations of the Hope Shelter was selected to appear in a national calendar for a major company, bringing additional visibility to the project. Father Michael found new purpose in his ministry, often sharing his personal experience to comfort parishioners facing their own struggles. His homilies, once technically correct but somewhat distant, now resonated with an authenticity that came from someone who had faced real challenges and found grace even in the hardest circumstances. The Hope Shelter thrived, becoming a regional model for assisting vulnerable children. The Sarah Foundation had helped establish 2 similar shelters in nearby towns, with plans for more. On a quiet afternoon, 2 years after the encounter at the abandoned house, Father Michael returned from a pastoral visit to a remote family when he noticed an envelope on the parish door. There was no sender, just his name written in elegant script. Inside was an old, slightly yellowed photograph, him and Sarah, both teenagers, sitting by a lake. On the back, a single sentence: "Some loves transcend time." The priest looked around, but no one was nearby. Who could have left this memento? Few in town knew about his distant past with Sarah, and even fewer would have access to photographs from that time. His heart racing, he entered the rectory, calling for Matthew and Mrs. Margaret, but there was no answer. A note on the kitchen table explained they had gone to the market to buy ingredients for Mrs. Dorothy's special birthday dinner, one of the shelter's most dedicated volunteers. Puzzled, Father Michael tucked the photograph into his pocket and decided to walk to the Hope Shelter. The afternoon was unusually beautiful, bathed in that golden light only Pennsylvania's countryside could produce at day's end. As he neared the shelter, he heard the lively voices of children. Laughter and chatter filled the air. Yet when he reached the gate, he found it closed with a handwritten sign. "Closed for special maintenance. Reopening tomorrow." This was odd. There was no scheduled maintenance he knew of, and the children's voices were still audible inside. Just as he was about to use his key, a familiar figure appeared around the corner. "Father Michael," called Emily, the social worker who had been involved in the case from the start. She seemed nervous. "What a surprise to see you here." "Emily? I didn't know you were in town." "I arrived last night," she replied, positioning herself strategically between the priest and the gate. "I was just on my way to find you. We need to talk about a new case we're handling." Something about Emily's demeanor felt forced, as if she were trying to distract him. "What's going on at the shelter?" he asked directly. "Why is it closed on a Wednesday afternoon?" Emily sighed, defeated. "It was supposed to be a surprise. Matthew made me promise to keep you away until everything was ready." "Ready for what?" "For the celebration of the 2 years since you met." Touched, Father Michael let Emily guide him to a cafe in the central square, where she suggested they wait an hour before returning to the shelter. "Matthew spent weeks planning this," she explained. "He practically mobilized the whole town. It would be a shame to ruin the surprise." Now, so the photograph was Mrs. Teresa's idea. She found the old album that belonged to Sarah among the things donated to the shelter. As they talked about the shelter's progress and how well Matthew was adjusting to his new school, Father Michael couldn't help but marvel at the son fate had given him, so young, yet already capable of organizing a celebration that brought the whole community together. Finally, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, Emily received a text on her phone. "They're ready for us," she announced with a smile. When they returned to the shelter, Father Michael was greeted by a corridor of people holding small lanterns, lighting the way to the inner garden. Matthew stood at the end of the path, visibly nervous but smiling. "Surprise, Dad," he said, hugging the priest. The garden had been transformed. Lights hung from the trees, creating a magical scene. Tables with white tablecloths displayed photographs, telling the shelter's story from its earliest days. In one corner, a small makeshift stage held a few children preparing for a performance. "What is all this?" Father Michael asked, moved. "It's our story," Matthew replied. "I thought we should celebrate the day we found each other, the day our lives changed forever." Bishop William, whom the priest hadn't noticed until then, approached with a warm smile. "Your son is truly special, Father Michael. He planned all this weeks in advance. He insisted I be here, saying he had something important to announce. The celebration exceeded all expectations. The shelter's children performed a short play recreating their meeting in the abandoned house, with surprising tenderness for their ages. Mrs. Dorothy and other women from the health ministry had prepared a feast with all of Father Michael and Matthew's favorite dishes. Even Sheriff Robert and his family were there, bringing a huge cake decorated with an image of the shelter. At the most touching moment of the evening, Matthew called everyone closer to the small stage and, overcoming his natural shyness, gave a brief speech. "2 years ago I was alone, scared and hopeless. My mother was sick, and I didn't know what would happen to me." His voice trembled slightly, but he continued. "Then I found my dad, who didn't know he was my dad, but still helped me. And then I found all of you, who became our family." He paused, looking directly at Father Michael. "Mom once told me family isn't just about blood. It's about who chooses to stay when it would be easier to leave. All of you chose to stay. And today I want to announce something I've been planning for a long time." Matthew unfolded a paper from his pocket and continued. "With the money I earned from the drawing that appeared in the national calendar, plus the donations we've collected, we're starting the Sarah's Seeds project. We'll offer scholarships to kids who've been through the shelter and show special talent in art, music, or sports. The first scholarship is already secured for guitar lessons for Peter. Peter, an 8-year-old boy who had arrived at the shelter 6 months earlier after losing his mother in an accident and being abandoned by his father, broke into a radiant smile, stunned by the news. Enthusiastic applause echoed through the garden. Bishop William, visibly moved, approached Matthew and placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of approval and blessing. When the commotion died down, Matthew searched for his father in the crowd and found him discreetly wiping away tears. "Did you like the surprise?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "Like it? Matthew, this is extraordinary. Your mother would be so proud of you." "I know," the boy replied with conviction. "She told me she would be." Later, when most of the guests had left, Father Michael Sullivan found Matthew sitting on the bench in the parish garden, the same spot where they had talked during those first tense days. The boy was drawing as he always did when processing complex emotions. "What are you drawing?" the priest asked, sitting beside his son. Matthew showed him the paper, a detailed sketch of the old abandoned house, now transformed into the Hope Shelter, with several children playing in front. In the sky, among stylized clouds, was the serene face of Sarah. "It's our story," Matthew explained simply, "how it started sad but got happy in the end." Father Michael hugged his son, deeply moved by the wisdom in that childlike observation. Yes, it had been a journey of pain and loss, of challenges and judgment, but it had also been a journey of discovery, of love rediscovered, of family found in the most unexpected circumstances. Gazing at the blue sky of Riverdale, the same sky Matthew had drawn with his mother watching from above, Father Michael felt a peace he hadn't known in a long time, not a peace that erased the pain of loss, but one that coexisted with it, turning it into something meaningful and even beautiful. "You're right, Matthew," he said at last. "Our story started sad, but it didn't end that way, and we're still writing it every day, with every child we help, with every moment we share." Matthew smiled, adding one more detail to his drawing: himself and his father, hand in hand, looking up at the sky. An unconventional family formed through pain but held together by love and faith. A family that had found its own path, its own meaning, its own everyday miracle. And so in the small town of Riverdale, life went on. The rural parish remained a beacon of hope for the community. The Hope Shelter opened its doors daily to children who, like Matthew once had, needed a safe refuge. And a priest and his son continued their journey together, honoring the memory of the woman who had brought them together in ways neither could have imagined. Like a tree that grows stronger after surviving a storm, the makeshift family of Father Michael and Matthew put down deep roots in the Riverdale community. Every challenge faced, every obstacle overcome only strengthened the bond between father and son, between them and the community that had become their extended family. That abandoned house, once a symbol of loneliness and despair, had become a beacon of hope for dozens of children. And on the main wall of the Hope Shelter, a large mural painted by Matthew silently told the story that had inspired it all. A priest who found a frightened boy and discovered not just a son, but a new dimension of his vocation and his humanity. End of story. Dear listener, the journey of Father Michael and Matthew shows us that family goes beyond conventional ties. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Your opinion matters. To us, what would you have done in Father Michael's place? Share your thoughts in the comments.